Have you ever thought about what makes the words you speak sound like, well, words? Or how people can communicate in sign language without speaking at all? Well, that's where phonology comes in. Basically, it's the science of how languages organize their building blocks, whether those sounds are in spoken languages or gestures in sign languages. Every language has its own sound system. For spoken languages, these sounds are called phones, little sounds that come together to form words. In sign languages, it's a bit different. Instead of sounds, the building blocks are movements, hand shapes, and locations, but the goal is still the same to organize these pieces so they can carry meaning. What's cool is that phonology doesn't just look at sounds or gestures on their own, it's all about the patterns. For example, in English, we know that BL can start a word like black, but LB cannot. That's a phonological rule. These rules are what make languages unique and give them their rhythm and flow. And phonology isn't just about spoken languages anymore. Researchers now know that sign languages have their own phonological systems too. So while people used to use different terms, like calling the pieces of signs karems instead of phonemes, we realized that the same big ideas apply to all languages, whether spoken or signed. The goal of this video will be to explore the key concepts of phonology and why it's so important in understanding languages. The word phonology actually has two meanings. It can refer to the study of sound systems in general, or to the specific sound system of a particular language. Along with syntax, the arrangement of words, morphology, the study of words, and the lexicon, vocabulary, phonology is one of the essential systems that make a language work. Even the word phonology has a story. It comes from the ancient Greek phone, which means voice or sound, and logos, which means word or study. So phonology is literally the study of sounds. Now, let's clear up some common confusion. Phonology versus phonetics. They're related but not the same. Phonetics is how sounds are made, what your tongue, lips, and vocal cords are doing. It's about the physical side of speech, production, transmission, and perception. Phonology, on the other hand, is about the function of sounds, how they're organized and used in a language to create meaning. Historically, people didn't always separate the two fields, but in the 20th century, linguists developed the idea of the phoneme, the smallest sound unit in a language that can change meaning, and phonology became its own thing. For example, in English, the sounds p and pat and b and bats are different phonemes because swapping one for the other changes the word's entire meaning. But phonemes aren't always pronounced the exact same way. That's where allophones come in. They are variations of a phoneme that don't change the meaning of the word. Take the t in English. It sounds different in top with a puff of air, but it's still the same phoneme because the word's meaning doesn't change. Phonology, as we understand it today, is built on centuries of exploration into the sounds of human language. The story begins in the 4th century BCE with Panini's monumental work, Ashtadhyayi, a Sanskrit grammar that remains one of the most systematic linguistic studies ever created. In this text, Panini not only analyzed morphology and syntax, but also laid the groundwork for phonology through the Shiva Sutras. These sutras introduce a notational system to classify Sanskrit sounds, essentially a list of its phonemes, showing an early awareness of the patterns underlying spoken language. Centuries later, in the 10th century, Ibn Jini of Mosul advanced the field by exploring Arabic morphology and phonology. His works, such as Kitab al-Munsif and Kitab al-Kasa'is, highlighted the interplay of sound and structure in Arabic, showing an analytical approach that paved the way for future scholars. Fast forward to the 19th century, and we meet the Polish scholar Jan Baudouin de Courtenay. He, along with his students, introduced the term phoneme as the smallest unit of sound that can distinguish meaning. The Prague school, flourishing in interyear wars, pushed phonology to new heights. Nikolai Trubetskoy, with his principles of phonology, formalized concepts like morphophonology, the phonological representation of morphemes, which are the smallest unit of meaning in a language, and the archiphoneme, phonemes that share traits except one distinctive one. While Roman Jakobson expanded the scope of phonological theory, influencing fields from semiotics, the study of signs and symbols, to poetics, the art of writing poetry. These scholars set the stage for phonology as a rigorous scientific discipline. In 1968, Noam Chomsky and Morris Holly's The Sound Pattern of English introduced generative phonology, a theory of how native speakers produce language. The late 20th century saw many phonological theories. Natural phonology, led by David Stamp, proposed universal phonological processes tailored to individual languages. Meanwhile, autosegmental phonology, introduced by John Goldsmith in 1976, revolutionized the field by proposing multi-tiered representations of phonological features, leading to innovations like feature geometry, which organized features in a hierarchical structure opposed to a set. The 1980s brought government phonology, which unified syntax and phonology under shared principles. In the 1990s saw the rise of the optimality theory, where languages are seen as balancing constraints to find the best output for a word's pronunciation. This approach, led by Alan Prince and Paul Smolensky, remains a cornerstone of contemporary phonological research. Finally, evolutionary phonology, a more recent development, integrates both synchronic perspectives, current patterns, and diachronic perspectives, historical changes, offering a holistic view of how sound systems evolve over time. Okay, I think that's a good enough background for the incredible field of phonology. Now, let's look at it even more, shall we? Phonology's most fascinating feature is the variety of sound systems across languages. Each language has a phonemic inventory, the range of sounds it uses. Take Hawaiian, for example, which has only 13 phonemes, making it one of the simplest sound systems. On the other hand, Ta, a Khoisan language, boasts over 100 phonemes, including unique click sounds. Languages also categorize their sounds using distinctive features, like whether a sound is voiced or voiceless, nasal or non-nasal, or made with a particular place of articulation. For instance, the sound B is voiced but non-nasal, while M is also voiced but nasal. Languages have rules that govern how sounds interact. First, we have assimilation. This is when a sound becomes more like its neighbors. In casual speech, input might change to input because the N assimilates to the bilabial P. Deletion and insertion. In some cases, sounds disappear, like in friendship, which often drops to D. In others, sounds are added, as in athlete, pronounced by some as athlete. Flapping, a symbol of American English, where the T in butter sounds like a R, similar to a quick D. Other processes. These include metathesis, swapping old sounds, as in Old English brid to Modern English bird, and vowel harmony, where vowels within a word become more similar, as seen in Turkish. I plan on going more in depth about certain processes in future videos in order to have an extensive playlist of linguistic analyses. Syllables are the building blocks of words, each with an onset, nucleus, and coda. In cat, the onset is k, the nucleus is a, and the coda is t. Languages have phonotactic constraints, rules about which sounds can appear together. For example, English doesn't allow words to start with ng, although this is perfectly fine in Vietnamese. Stress and prosody brings rhythm and melody to speech. Compare record to record, a difference marked by stress. Meanwhile, intonation, like a rising pitch in questions, adds even more nuance. Different languages prioritize sound patterns in unique ways. Tonal languages like Mandarin use pitch to differentiate meaning, while stressed languages like English rely on emphasis. Phonology isn't just an academic pursuit, it has real-world implications. In language learning, understanding phonology explains why English speakers may struggle with Mandarin tones or why French learners struggle with the English R. Speech technology, like Siri or Google Translate, relies on phonological rules for accurate recognition and synthesis. In sociolinguistics, phonology distinguishes accents and dialects, revealing identity and cultural ties. That's going to be the end of the video. I hope that this was a good analysis for linguists, language learners, and everybody in general. As you can see, phonology is extremely important in understanding language, whether through linguistics or through language learning. If you want to learn more about phonology yourself, search up the IPA chart online and read articles about phonology, researching any term that is unfamiliar to you. As always, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and let me know what analysis I should make next. I'll see you guys in the next one.